Welcome back to the podcast that exists to enrich and inspire young Latinos.
Bienvenidos al podcast que existe para enriquecer e inspirar a jóvenes latinos. Gracias por acompañarnos. Está hoy con nosotros
Karina,
Jay
y Dayana.
Y el día de hoy vamos a tener una conversación sobre el proceso de madurez en la fe. Y para eso vamos a comentar, vamos a reflexionar en los 5 pasos que el documento de Aparecida menciona sobre el proceso de madurar en la fe. Y el primer paso es el encuentro con Cristo. Entonces empecemos por ahí, muchachos. ¿Por qué es importante que nuestra caminar en la fe comience con un encuentro con la persona de Jesús? Take it away.
Okay. I think for me, being raised in the church my whole life, I was always really interested in Catholic history and like how everything worked, how everything was structured. So I can recall, being a little kid and like Googling stuff like how's this work, blah, 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 like
Man,
Bible
you're
stories,
young.
stuff like that.
You were a kid and Google existed?
Yeah, bro.
When I was a kid, that was canicas.
But I was Catholic because I liked the nerdy part of being a Catholic. And like I went to mass because my parents made me, and I like knew that Jesus was in the Eucharist because that's what they taught me, right? But it wasn't until I can remember the first time, right, I had like a real encounter with Christ. I was 17. I actually think Karina might have been there.
Oh,
we were having
so honored.
We were having a Pascua retreat at Olam. And it was really weird because it was something super random. It was Good Friday, and we were watching a video on sin and how Christ, as he was dying on the cross, saw the sins that were going to happen in the next 2,000 years of human existence, right? So he saw World War I, World War II, the Crusades, the plague, all this evil that was going to happen in the world. And I was like, damn, he died for us. Even though he knew that we were going to do all that. And something kind of just clicked in me, where at 17, I was like, okay, this is why I'm Catholic. Not because of all this other stuff that I've liked up until now, but because Christ died for us and he loves me that much. And that was my first like encounter. And that gave me purpose. And then now after that, I was like, okay, this is my base, and from here I build. Whereas before that, it was kind of like, now I'm just doing whatever, and kind of trying to learn as I can, but had no real reason why I was doing that.
Muchachos.
My experience is a lot different because I wasn't interested at all in like the nerdy part of being a Catholic. And I grew up with parents that were raising me as more of a cradle Catholic. So éramos católicos por cultura, por tradición. And so when I started my process of maturing in my faith in 2017, when I was 17 years old, I think the fact that my process started with encountering Christ was important because it was impactful that even though Christ, like Jesus, had been relevant in my life up until then, just for the sake of being a cradle Catholic, I had never actually personally met him. It's kind of like when you kind of hear of somebody for your, like, como el tío que tu mamá siempre te platica que existe, and then you never actually meet them. So when you finally get to meet them, it's like you've known who they are for such a long time, but you've never been connected because you've never had the time to get to know each other. So when my process started, that I actually encountered Christ face to face personally, like, hi, I'm Dayana, nice to meet you. Hi, I'm Jesus, nice to meet you. That's kind of how it went at the Iskali retreat. Then that kind of made me like fall in love with wanting to know more of who he was, because I wasn't interested when I knew that, yeah, he exists and he's there and he cares for you. But how I don't know how we expect people to believe that Christ loves them and cares for them if they don't actually know him personally, like have a personal relationship with him. So I think that's why it's important that you start your process with actually getting to know Christ and actually meeting him like face to face.
I think my encounter was a little bit of the mix of Dayana and Jay. I feel like I was present at both of your personal encounters with
yes,
Jesus.
You were.
We've known each other for a very long time. Like I relate to both of you. Like I was still raised or going to mass every Sunday. You have to go get ashes. You go to mass for Easter, Christmas, todas las cosas, todo el escándalo de todas las fiestas. But I didn't really have a really true understanding. It was just, this is what we have to do. And it wasn't until I was like 14, 15, I think, up to 16 years old, where I had an encounter where I began to understand that God hand selected me, and I knew that he was using me for what? No sabía. But I felt enough trust to say, I'm going to keep on this path until I figure out who you are and what you want to use me for. And I think my real encounter happened when I was 19 and I lived the initiation retreat con Iskali. And I began to encounter Jesus as like a person, not as like God, omnipotent, this person being that looks above us from heaven and sees everything that we do and the sins, but more as a person. And then the nerdy part and the thirst and the wanting to know more of him came after that for me.
Yeah. Qué bonito, ¿no? Que ustedes todos pueden pensar en su primer encuentro, porque hay más encuentros, si no, imagínense que nomás tenemos un primer encuentro. Pero yo creo que ahora, regresando a la importancia de empezar por el encuentro, es que muchas veces, ¿verdad? Nos encontramos con católicos que somos católicos por tradición, católicos que somos católicos porque nuestro papá, nuestra mamá lo hizo, pero en realidad tenemos una relación con las enseñanzas de la iglesia y tenemos una percepción buena o mala de las enseñanzas de la iglesia, pero sin el encuentro con Jesús, esa relación es una relación estéril, porque no tenemos una relación personal con el motivo, con la persona de Jesús, ¿no? Y yo creo que eso es lo que diferencia, por decir, a nuestra iglesia de, pudiéramos decir, de otras maneras de entender o de seguir a Dios, ¿no? No estamos fundados simplemente en seguir unas enseñanzas, sino el proceso se comienza con el encuentro con una persona, ¿verdad? Y esa persona es la persona de Jesús. Y el documento de Aparecida dice que comenzar el proceso de cualquier otra manera sería comenzar un proceso estéril que no va a dar frutos, ¿no? Y yo creo que es importante para todas las personas que están escuchando, ¿no? Preguntarte, ¿has tenido tú un encuentro personal con la persona de Jesús? Y si no, ¿cómo lo puedes buscar? ¿No? Jesús de alguna manera se manifiesta a todos nosotros de una manera diferente y en un momento diferente. Pero es importante buscar tener este encuentro personal con la persona de Jesús, ¿no? El segundo paso que menciona el documento es la conversión. Y describe el documento la conversión como la respuesta a mi encuentro personal con Cristo, ¿no? Y esta respuesta al encuentro personal con Cristo es de que yo poco a poco comienzo a tener a cambiar mi manera de vivir, de ser, de pensar, de sentir, ¿no? El encuentro con Jesús tiene el primer efecto, que es comenzar nuestro proceso de conversión. Y también, ¿no? Estamos hablando de que este es un proceso que empieza con el encuentro de Jesús. El segundo paso es la conversión, pero la conversión tampoco no es un evento, ¿no? No podemos decir, ¡ay, ya me convertí! Ya me salvé. No, es un proceso de transformación, pero sí es el segundo paso. Es, ahora sí que la respuesta al encuentro. ¿Qué comentario nos pueden compartir ustedes sobre esto, ¿no? Sobre la conversión y cómo la conversión ha estado presente en sus vidas y cómo la entienden en sus propias vidas.
Yo la entiendo como something that's ongoing, y igual que el encuentro es algo que no nomás sucede una vez, like sigue sucediendo, because I think that before my encounter, there were other encounters, I just didn't see them or I chose to ignore them, and I think of it as like Jesus standing outside my door and knocking, but I've had my headphones on the entire time and I don't hear him knocking, and then it gets to a point where your soul is just so hungry for him and it's hungry to get to know him that por fin te destapas las orejas de los audífonos and you hear him knocking, and then you decide to go and open the door. Entonces what happens after you open the door es la conversión. And that's kind of like where the factual part that you were talking about, Jay, came in, because that's the part of my conversion journey where I wanted to learn more. Almost like after you go on a first date and you hit it off with the person. Like I went on my first date with Jesus And now I want to get to know more about him. Like, who is he? Like, what are his interests? What are my interests? How does he view me? Like, how do I view him? And how does the way that Jesus look at me differentiate? And like, how is it similar to the way that I look at him now? So I guess it's a process of like learning to fall in love with your faith and learning to fall in love with who the human side of Jesus is, because he was human. And I think that in my conversion process, that's the part where I understood that Jesus is also human. And that's where I got to know him. And that's really where him and I became friends. Like, that's where him and I became like inseparable, because after that first encounter that I finally decided to like open my eyes for, I think that once you encounter him, it's so like impactful that you can't like unmeet him ever again. Like, he's just always in the back of your mind. Even if somewhere along the conversion process you try to get rid of him, he's just always there, because that first impression that he makes on your life is so impactful. I think the conversion part keeps happening, and you have to actively keep wanting it and like keep working at it. Porque a veces dan ganas de ahí parar, you know, to stop right at the conversion because you're no longer interested or something else is starting to get in the way. So I think it's a decision that you have to keep making. And it's just as important as the encuentro part, you know?
To me, I feel like it's kind of like a friendship at the beginning. Like, once you like have that encounter with Jesus, just like making a friend, it's awkward at the beginning where you guys don't know each other. Well, Jesus knows you and everything about you, but you're getting to know him and you're getting to know how to be a being with him. And I think your friendship with Jesus and your conversion process is very much like a friendship where as you're getting to know each other and you're investing time in each other, the more beautiful it becomes. And así como te peleas con tus amigas y tus hermanas and you guys se reconcilian and maduran y crecen, I feel like my conversion process has been very similar to that, where I've also had my falling outs with Jesus, where it's like, me abandonaste and you weren't there for me. But I know he was there. Like, now I know, like, the maturity in me now as a young adult, I know that he was always there with me. It just took me that maturity to realize that you were there and you're still there. And I think looking at that really makes it easier for me to understand and explain to other people my age who say, well, Jesus, why does this happen to me? I had my encounter, but what happened after that?
Yeah, I think it's important because the conversion process is where now you take the first encounter and now you decide how that's going to affect your life. It's like, okay, I had this meeting, changed my life. Now what? It's like, do I just keep doing what I've been doing up until now this whole time? Or do I now, was this impactful enough that it's going to make me change the way I live my life? So I think it's important. It's important that your first encounter, you acknowledge that it is that like spark. And it's like when you light a candle on fire, it's never the same candle. You can turn it off, but it's still less than what it was before, right? It's different. It's changed. So I think to think of the conversion as like how am I changed now and what comes from that? And how do I continue to, like you girls were saying, how do you continue the relationship with Christ? What does that look like now moving forward as I keep learning and falling in love?
Yo creo que lo que yo pudiera decir sobre el proceso de conversión es que es muy peligroso quedarte en el primer paso, ¿no? Uh-huh. Donde Jesús solamente es esa emoción y me hizo sentir bien y lloré. Y cada vez que me siento mal necesito regresar a Jesús. Y el segundo paso del proceso de madurez es la conversión, porque it's not fun anymore. Now you have to change habits. You have to mend relationships. Now you have to learn how to say sorry. Now you have to clean your room, right? Como ahora hay trabajo para hacer. Ya tuviste un encuentro con Jesús y ahora debe de notarse el cambio. Y no tiene que ser un cambio radical inmediato, pero debe notarse el cambio, ¿verdad? Debe haber algo especial, algo diferente. Y yo creo que es importante reconocer el proceso de conversión como el segundo paso, porque lo más cómodo podría ser quedarnos en el primer, conozco a Jesús, es mi amigo y me perdona todo, y es un Jesús casi, un Jesús alcahuete, ¿no? Que todo lo que hagas está bien, te ama, su misericordia. No, el segundo paso que nos menciona Aparecida nos reta a que el primer encuentro con Jesús debe de tener un impacto en nosotros. No solamente es emoción y siento a Dios y qué bonito, sino, ok, si sientes a Dios, cómo Dios está transformando tu corazón y tu mente, ¿no? Ahora pasamos al tercero, que es el discipulado, ¿no? Y en el discipulado ya es un proceso donde vas madurando y reconoces a Jesús como maestro. El proceso de discipulado, dice Aparecida, que podría tener dos aspectos fundamentales, que uno es la formación, ¿no? Conocer a Jesús, la formación, y la otra es reconocer a Jesús en los sacramentos, ¿no? Dos pilares importantes para ser discípulo. Continuar tu contacto con Jesús a través de los sacramentos, y segunda, formarte. Entender tu fe. Ahora sí, ya no, tu primer encuentro es en el corazón. La conversión comienza a transformar tu vida. Entonces, tercero, vamos ahora, seguimos una fe racional, o que puede ser racionalizada, ¿no? ¿Cómo podemos ahora reconocer no solamente a Jesús, sino también a sus enseñanzas? ¿Cómo han vivido su experiencia de discipulado en sus propias vidas, y cómo lo entienden?
I think for me, the discipleship comes from the word, like to be a disciple. What does it mean? It means now I'm not just one of the people that sees Jesus from afar, but I'm choosing to be near him at all times and willing to change my life, to conform my life around the fact that this is something that's a big part of my life. So I think for me, living discipleship has been constantly forming, constantly learning more and more about our Catholic faith and about God, Christ, theology, reading the Bible, listening to podcasts, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, you said the sacraments is the other part, making sure that I'm praying more than I ever have, because my praying has not always been good, right? Making sure that I go to Mass every Sunday, holy hours, rosaries, just praying before I go to bed, praying when I leave my house, all that kind of stuff. And I think discipleship is what changes my life on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's important also that discipleship is like the hard work that you put in that people aren't going to see. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with people aren't going to see me praying this rosary. People aren't going to see me going to Mass. People aren't going to see me in holy hour. And it's fine because I don't need them to. But for a lot of us, it's like, no, I want people to know that I'm doing all this stuff. But this is the hard work that you put in to get the prize later. Like all these influencers talk about, you got to grind alone to make it big someday. And this is us grinding alone with Christ, alone in the Adoration Chapel, alone in my room, praying a rosary at night, reading the Bible in the morning, or whatever it is. It's like the work that you do on the day-to-day, grinding daily to win that prize in the end. And this is just like the discipleship is just, what does that look like? And for me, it's enjoying the sacraments, going to Mass, confession, the Eucharist, and then just learning as much as I can. Because like I said earlier, like I was already into the nerdy stuff. So once I hit step one, then it was just like, okay, now my nerdiness has a purpose, and it just grows from there.
I really like what Jay said where about the work in the background. And I think that's the biggest difference between this stage and being in Kerigma, where it's Kerigma, it's look at me, and just like getting. And I think with discipleship, you're giving. And to put it in the sense of a really relatable sense is like como servir un retiro. At the beginning, you're so like, I want to do everything and share my testimony and do this and do that and like share everyone and make everyone cry. And it's kind of like, look at me serve. But I think once you get to this level of maturity, it's empowering los que están en Kerigma to kind of say, like, look at you serve and doing the work in the background. And I think, como dice Jay, no one's going to see you going to adoration or living the sacraments. No one sees the background of it all. And also, I think that las batallas, because I feel like we can't just say having a spiritual life is just like sunshines and rainbows. Like, tenemos las batallas espirituales donde también sentimos que estamos solos en ese proceso where it's like, is it even worth it? Like, tantos rosarios que recé, pero ¿qué está pasando? And even though we understand that we're not always going to see immediate results, sometimes we're still looking for something extraordinary to happen to kind of say, for God to say, I'm still here. And we know that God has never liked extraordinary things. He's like the ordinary things. And I think having that maturity in the formation allows you to realize that. And I think for me, formation has always been something that I really love to do. My favorite people call me Miss Gonzalez. I love learning and I like teaching, but I think part of it became using my formation to better myself and to teach others, and just showing that God isn't just a feeling and spirituality isn't just feeling good. It's also understanding that God is with us in the moments that we don't feel good. And that brokenness that we have is also part of our process.
It's also like worth pointing out and important to point out that this process, it's not like a linear process.
Yeah.
It has its like ups and its downs. It has its high points and it has its low points. Because, for example, like here in Iskali, nosotros tenemos un retiro de discipulado. And in my own personal process of maturing in my faith, back when that retreat was first offered to me, like first the invitation to go was there, I didn't take it. I didn't go. And almost everybody else in my community went, because even though it seems like that was the next step for me, it wasn't, because I was going through like a spiritual desolation where I just wasn't strong in my faith. And I was still working and I had a lot to work on in step 2. So I wasn't ready to move on to step 3. And it took me a little bit longer than the rest of my like community members. But then when my time came, then I went and I lived that experience of my process. But I think that discipulado is the point where it's either going to make or break you, because it's hard. Like Vicente was saying, like that's the hard part, because at this point I started to clean my room, like to make my bed, to make these small changes in my life. And like Karina was saying, the way that we serve retreats, anybody can go and give a testimony on their encuentro, on their step 1, and even on their step 2, and make people cry and have them have like an emotional experience. But like crying and giving a testimony isn't gonna like teach a formation class, and it's not gonna form other jóvenes, and it's not gonna have like the full effect of evangelization, because emotions are temporary. So in discipulado, it's where you have to decide, like, I have to go to mass, I have to do adoration, I have to go confess, I have to receive communion every Sunday, because I know that I should, even when I don't want to. And sometimes I'm tired, sometimes I'm unmotivated, sometimes I'm questioning God's existence. Like sometimes it goes to that extreme, but you have to still do it. Like you have to do it unmotivated. You have to do it when you don't want to do it, because step 2 has prepared me enough and strengthened my faith enough to say, okay, step 3 is just as important. And I'm not going to be able to get to step 4 if I don't work on my discipulado, even when I don't feel like it, because I know that I want it, but I'm not going to feel it every day, because it's choices. Like you have to choose to move along in this process, because you realistically don't feel it at all times.
Sí. Y es difícil, ¿verdad? Es difícil ser discípulo. De repente se te pierde Jesús y dices, ¿dónde está el maestro? ¿Dónde está el maestro? Pero yo creo que si no aprendemos de Jesús, ¿verdad? Si no aprendemos de Jesús, pues nunca vamos a poder compartir a Jesús, ¿no? Es un paso más sobre nuestra madurez. El cuarto paso que menciona el documento Aparecida es la comunión, o con otra manera diferente de decirlo, según la palabra en griego, koinonia. Sería la comunión de los miembros, ¿verdad? Que es la comunidad, cómo participar de una manera activa en la iglesia, que es comunidad, ¿no? Y aquí viene el compromiso con comunidad, ¿no? Y nosotros aquí en Iskali tenemos pequeñas comunidades, pero ya en un compromiso con la comunidad, que no voy a ver qué me dan, sino voy también yo a aportar como miembro activo y no solamente como un miembro pasivo. No soy el que pertenece a la comunidad para quejarse, sino para decir, bueno, ¿cómo hacemos mejor? Esto está mal, ¿y qué? No, cuando a mí me dicen algo, bueno, pues esto está mal, y le digo, ¿y qué? ¿Lo vamos a mejorar o no? Porque I can tell you 100 things that are wrong, ¿verdad? So, ¿cómo ustedes han vivido creen que se puede vivir esta cuarta etapa, ¿no? Que es el compromiso con la participación eclesial y el compromiso de participar en tu comunidad?
I think as humans, we're like innately like wired to want and to get and not so much to give. I feel like we're like innately selfish. And I think this, I guess, is one of the hardest things that I grapple with, where it's kind of like, yo que estoy ofreciendo? How am I filling Jay's cup? How am I filling Dayana's cup? Not so much, how am I filling my cup? And I guess now that it's like, every time we talk about this, people ask, like, where do you think you are? And it's like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm at 1, I'm at 2, I'm at 3, and then I go back to 1 step. But I think being in communion, it's a lot. And I feel like it's a little bit of a mixture of everything. Because you also, it's not a cycle. It goes like, I don't know how to describe this on up and down, like no sé. But I think one of the biggest things that has like cost me to understand is like, how can Jesus out of everyone in the world pick me? Of all people, what's so special about me? And just understanding that my brokenness and my mistakes and the mistakes that I'm going to make are also part of his timeline and part of what he has planned. And I guess that takes a lot to understand and I guess to accept, because I'm one of the big complainers where everybody knows me. I can complain about anything. And I think this is one of the biggest things that I struggle with, just because it's like, it's hard. I wish I had a deeper explanation of this and my feelings.
Yeah, participation in community is hard. Yeah, because it's commitment, right?
It's hard. I feel like it's really hard to be like so like down and dirty and just say like, aquí la cagué. Because like, por ejemplo, like yo, because I've known Dayana since we were kids. I've known Jay for at least 12 years. How am I going to tell Jay that I did something really bad? It's like, is he going to tell my dad? Maybe not, but still, like, esa vergüenza where I still hold back. And I think that holding back doesn't allow me to be a participant in the community.
Para mí también, como decía Karina, comunidad es lo que se me hace a veces difícil. And I think I agree that it is challenging. And like, my response won't be as deep either. It's just hard, like in the most human way, and like realistically, it's hard to stay committed to, for example, all 4 of us are part of the same community. We're all community members with each other. So a veces yo me siento like tan vacía que digo, ¿qué les voy a aportar? Like, ¿qué les voy a dar? Like, yo no tengo nada, entonces yo
They're doing so well. Why am I going to bring the mood down?
Yeah, and a veces, and that's exactly what I was talking about at our community the last time we met, is that sometimes I feel like everybody's cup in your community is so full and everybody seems to be full. Maybe we aren't, but we're really good at making it seem like we are, because that's what we have. That's exactly the type of things that we have to work on, like as a community. But sometimes we make it seem like we're so full that then here I come with like my empty cup and I'm like, oh, well, I guess I got to pretend to be full too, because I don't have anything to give. So then we start making stuff up. And these are the kind of like boundaries that we have to break in community. And it's really hard, because it's really hard to be that vulnerable and to be that open and honest, not only with everybody else, but with yourself. Because sometimes I find that it's even hard for me to be that honest with my own life, you know? So in a realistic way, it's hard to show up. Like, it's just hard to show up and be there. But it's also like, we know that we're not meant to enter heaven alone. Like, we're supposed to be there together. And this is also where that is solidified, that these are the people that you're going to walk to heaven with. And if I make it to heaven by myself and I don't see anybody from my community up there, then it's going to be like, God, why did you let me in? Like, and I'm sure he won't. Like, I'm sure he won't. If I show up to the gates of heaven without somebody waiting for me in there already, or without me having somebody on the way, like from my community, I'm not going to make it in, because from the beginning of time, we weren't meant to be alone. Like, we're not meant to be alone. So now that we've gone through like discipulado and started to form our faith, and we've learned all of these things, and we've fallen in love with Christ, and we have such a good relationship with him. That love for Christ is not supposed to stay hidden. It's supposed to be shared, and you're supposed to share it with your community members and ultimately the people that you are going to make it to heaven with.
When I think of communion, I think of communion is the most primal state of the church. Like the church at its core, when it started, Peter and Paul didn't go building these massive buildings when they went all over Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and all these countries that they went to, right? The Bible says they build Christian communities. That's what the church is at its core. It's a community of people. And I completely agree with what you girls said, that it's hard. It's hard to be open with people. It's hard to bring your problems to others and to help others with their problems when maybe we don't relate or whatever the case is. But it's not meant to be easy. It's just how much skin are you willing to put in the game? How much are you willing to try and work at it? And I think being in communion is hard, but that's the whole point of why we have each other. And even if, you can't be super close to everybody in your community, I think it's okay as long as you have somebody in that community that you can have no filter with. I think that's a starting point. And from there, you're able to move forward and eventually, hopefully, get to a place where you can talk to anybody in your community in any way without there being any issue. But it's the basis for what it means to be a Christian, was to be in community with other people.
We do community because God himself is community, right? Padre, Hijo y Espíritu Santo, una comunidad perfecta de amor, dándose amor a sí mismos eternamente. It's not something we make up, ¿verdad? Nuestro Dios en sí es una comunidad de amor. Y estamos llamados a imitarlo, ¿verdad? Entonces, pero es difícil imitar a Dios en el compartir amor y dar amor y recibir amor tan perfectamente como Él lo sabe hacer. Y yo creo que es el reto de comunidad, ¿verdad? Que no sabemos compartir, dar y recibir amor como Dios lo sabe hacer. Y yo creo que el proceso para toda nuestra vida, el aprender a dar, recibir amor de la manera correcta a cada persona individual, porque cada persona lo da y lo recibe de una manera diferente, ¿no?
That's the meaning of life.
Último paso, la misión, ¿no? La última etapa. Amamos y estamos tan enamorados con Jesús que nos vemos casi de una manera obligados por nuestro corazón para ir a compartirlo con los demás, ¿no? La última etapa es la misión, el apostolado, el ser enviados. ¿Por qué ustedes creen que esta etapa es tan diferente y cuántas personas en la iglesia nunca participan de la misión y del apostolado? ¿Y por qué creen que esto sucede?
I think this stage is very different because people don't go through all the other ones first. Mm-hmm. And you have to go through everything before you can go out and preach to others and help people convert. Because if you don't have your own experience, you can't teach people what it was like to feel God. If you aren't formed, you can't teach people about the church and about God, what's in our scriptures, right? What's in our dogma. If you weren't a disciple, you can't teach discipleship. And if you haven't experienced communion, you can't teach communion. So you have to have done all these things. You don't have to be a master in everything, but you have to have experience in all of them to go out and be able to teach somebody. Because if I am an expert in making you cry with a tema, it's awesome. But if I can't teach you how to pray a rosary even, then I'm cheating you out of what it really is to be Catholic. And I'm not helping you meet God in the way that you should. If I know nothing about the Eucharist, and if I can't answer a question like why is Jesus present in the Eucharist and why do we believe that, then I'm lying to you about what God really is. And I feel like you have to go through everything first to be able to get to that last step.
I don't know. I'm going to be completely honest, and I'm just going to say ditto to Jay. And I feel like when we think of misión, we think of like going off to these like wilderness and like far off places where it's like, do you know Jesus? Let me teach you. And I think a lot of people know of Jesus, but because of one reason or another, they don't share it. Like you can know Jesus, you can know of Jesus, but one thing is knowing of him and knowing him. And I think a lot of us are just afraid to like come clean and being completely honest with ourselves to be able to kind of help each other with those processes. Como dijo Jay, you can't do one without already having experienced it. And I feel like, especially because the closer you get to Jesus, the more lonely you are. And it's a true testament of it. Like, as Jesus was getting crucified, of his 12 best friends, ¿cuántos se quedaron? Right? His best friend lo rechazó 3 veces. And just saying, the closer that you are to God, the more lonely it gets. And I feel like that's why it's so hard to get to, like, misión or to be able to teach other, you like to be able to get to discipulado, to be able to get pasquerismo a veces también, because el diablo te ataca, and he knows you the best, and he uses your weaknesses to make you weaker. And I feel like that's why, especially like with spiritual desolation, that's like I felt it, and I was like, I don't feel Jesus, but like once I understood that there's like a word to the meaning, like it felt like I was like, okay, I'm not alone in this, and I'm not the only one suffering through this. Ahora qué? And I feel like not a lot of people have that. Now what? How do I fix this? How can I work past this question? Because it's kind of like you're getting up and then you're getting knocked back down.
This one's kind of hard for me to answer as well, because I feel like I'm in the community aspect of my process. But even though maybe I haven't necessarily experienced La Misión to its full like magnitude of what it's going to look like in my life, I know that it's something that I look forward to. And I know that that's the next step for me, and that it's going to lead me to heaven and to this encounter with Christ. And it's going to lead me to where God I was always meant to be, you know? So I think it's also like the rest of the steps going to be hard. And I'm looking forward to it though. I think if a lot of people haven't gotten to Misión, it's because they got lost somewhere else along the way. And that's something that you have to keep working towards every day. And no matter what step of the process that you're in, you have to just keep working every day to get to the next step and get to the next step. So that's the next step for me. And that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah. Pues gracias por escucharnos. Gracias, muchachos, por compartir. Gracias por escuchar. Este es su podcast favorito. Y ojalá a través de estos 5 pasos, todos los que nos están escuchando hayan podido reflexionar un poquito en qué etapa de la madurez de fe se encuentran. Si encontraste riqueza y valor en este podcast, no olvides compartirlo con alguien. Muchísimas gracias. Adiós.
Adiós.
Bye.
No olviden seguirnos en Instagram y en Facebook en Iskali Podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Iskali Podcast.
Listen with us and experience the joy of the gospel.
Escúchanos y experimenta la alegría del Evangelio. Te esperamos.
Dare to dream.
Atrévete a soñar.